Everybody, I'd like to introduce to you guys environmental ethics. And so let me go ahead and share the screen here and pull that up. And here we go. So let me actually go into the modules real quick, pull up environmental ethics, and here we go. So a lot of you might actually have a background in environmental ethics. It may be your major, you may be very familiar with it, and this will only scratch the surface what we're covering in this class. This is just an introduction to environmental ethics. So it's environmental studies with the emphasis on ethics, of course. So we're going to be looking at it from a philosophical perspective and not obviously as detailed in any way if you were taking an environmental studies course. So first of all, environmental ethics, what's it all about? So the number one conversation that we need to discuss is bullet one, and it's looking at the ethical relationship between humans and the environment. And it's, if you're going to take the environmental ethics approach, you would be seeing yourself as part of the environment. It wouldn't be that nature is out there as a storehouse for you to use as you will, kind of like an abuse of nature, or there's resources there and you can take what you want kind of thing. There has been an argument presented in the 1960s by a historian named Lynn White, and she really credits, or attributes, I should say, the Judeo-Christian model to that kind of idea of exploitation. And in no way is this a challenge to the religion itself. I have to be clear here. It's just that whole paradigm that's sometimes presented or mentioned in Genesis, where it's argued that the world was given to humankind and we have dominion over it, and it's there for us to use as we see fit, kind of thing. That whole understanding of dominion over something, she would argue, or she had argued, that that kind of puts us at odds against nature instead of working with and seeing it part of nature is part of our world, that we should honor and respect it, and there should be an appreciation of nature and a working with nature rather than a dominion over and a control of and a use and abuse situation. So I hope I explained that very clearly. Again, it's not challenging religion as it is to challenge that paradigm that was presented in the Hebrew scriptures in the first text there. So when did this whole discipline develop? It developed actually in the 60s and 70s, but I'm going to argue something, and I didn't put it here in the notes, but I think it's something that I think would be something relevant, and that's the idea that I think the first environmentalists we've ever had on the planet go back way before the 20th century, and I'm going to actually attribute it back to the Jains 2,000 some years ago. Jains was a religion you were exposed to in Lesson Plan 4 when we looked at Eastern philosophy, and a lot of their material focuses on the environmental respect for the world and taking care of the planet and taking care of nature and so forth. And so they're going to be, in my mind, one of our first environmentalists. And I wrote a book on that topic of Jains and environmentalism. Didn't assign it for you guys. I think I did assign like a chapter 2 back in Lesson Plan 4, but that whole idea of Jainism as being our first environmentalist is such a cool concept. But as a movement that you're familiar with, it's going to be going back to the 60s and 70s, and it's going to be going back, and let me go down to these here, and then I'll go back up to this quote. It's going to go back to 2 books that really set the movement and started it off, and it's Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, that's oftentimes quoted. I think it's even mentioned in your reading when it introduces to environmental ethics. And she wrote a book discussing the harmful effects of pesticides on ourselves and on the environment, and that really set the stage for the environmentalist movement, her text, and also Paul Ehrlich's book called The Population Bomb, which looks at the human growth and the impact of, an explosion of human growth on the planet. So as a distinct field, it really developed in the 1970s, and this is when on April 22nd, 1970, Earth Day was established. And it was established through some of the effort by a senator called Senator Wilson. His name was Senator Wilson of Wisconsin, and it was a movement which caused 20 million Americans coast to coast to hold rallies and establish respect and honor for the planet Earth. So Earth Day. Now, April 22nd is my son's birthday, so I'm super happy to have given birth on Earth Day. Okay, so a little bit, before I jump down here, a little bit of materials up here. And this is the whole idea that Albert Schweitzer And Albert Schweitzer is going to be from like a couple decades before this, 20s and 30s and 40s. Albert Schweitzer wrote a piece called The Reverence for Life. And this is just a small section of it. And it's a small quote. And it really captures that whole essence of expanding our moral circle beyond a human-centered moral circle to one that includes other living things, to includes other parts of the world and the environment and so forth, even the future of the planet. So Albert Schweitzer's essay really predates the 60s and 70s, so one can even argue the environmentalist movements have its roots back to this material. And here's this quote: "Reverence for Life says that the only thing we're really sure of is that we want to live, and so to, let me start over. Reverence for Life says that the only thing we're really sure of is that we live and want to go on living. This is something that we share with everything else that lives, from elephants to blades of grass, and of course, every human being. So we are brothers and sisters to all living things, and we owe to all of them the same care and respect that we wish for ourselves." So I just mentioned the moral circle, expanding out the moral circle, moral consideration for all living things. And in addition to that, it's that whole kind of golden rule: as we want them to do to us, so do we do to them. And kind of that golden rule, we usually apply it human to human, but here it's asking us to do it human to the planet itself. Okay, going down here to two classic positions, we have the anthropomorphic and the non-anthropomorphic model. And the anthropomorphic is one where, as I think you might have been familiar with that term sometime, it's the human-centered, humans are at the center, anthros, humans, center. And it's kind of this position that, it's a different paradigm. It's the position that my only concern for the environment is how it impacts me as a human, or how it impacts my race, let's say the human race. But I'm not really concerned about nature for its own intrinsic value. And so that would be the anthropocentric. And for instance, I may be worried about pollution, the depletion of resources, climate change, etc., but I'm only concerned about it as it impacts humans. And so that would be the anthropocentric. It's focused on the human. And yes, you can be concerned about the environment, but again, as it impacts humans. And so this particular Norwegian philosopher kind of calls this paradigm, or this worldview, a little more shallow than what he calls the non-anthropomorphic, a little more deep. And what is a non-anthropomorphic or ecocentric? It's saying that nature has its own intrinsic value in and of itself, independent of the human being. It kind of fits with, I mentioned Spinoza. I don't know if you remember, but Spinoza's philosophy that everything, you know, is a manifestation of the divine and all of it should be respected. Schweitzer's reverence for life fits perfectly here. And so this non-anthropomorphic or ecocentric model is really captured in what's called this last human scenario experiment. And this last human scenario thought experiment was a thought experiment that's developed in the 1970s by Richard Sylvan. And he basically says, you know, you can kind of, by thinking about this thought experiment, I'll walk you through it in a minute, you can kind of figure out which position you hold. And he's more in favor of this, as you can see. The non-anthropocentric, what the thought experiment is imagine there was an apocalypse and all humans were wiped off the planet, but you happen to be the last human. And let's say, you know, you're not going to be here very long, but you are still the last living, breathing human on this planet. All the other organisms are untouched, they're fine. And as the last human on this planet, do you think it would be okay just to go out and destroy the redwoods just for the fun of it, or just destroy the oceans of the planet because there's no other humans? There's no real point of worrying about it because the humans are now wiped out and there's just you and you're soon to be wiped out yourself. Well, the last human scenario, if the answer is that is appalling to think that one would do that, that is unacceptable, that is immoral, blah, 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 then that kind of represents that non-anthropocentric moral take on it. If you think it's perfectly fine, you know, who cares, because humans are now gone, so whatever happens to planet Earth is of no consequence, so destroy it if you will, that would be the more anthropocentric model. So that kind of thought experiment gives you insight of how you really see the situation. Now, the topic of animals, I'm talking a lot about nature and the environment, but I never discuss animals because that's going to get its own lesson plan, and that will be coming up shortly on an exploration of what's called animal welfare, and we'll be looking at like Tom Reagan and Peter Singer and others there. Now, what do we have here? Destruction of life in some form required for existence. This is interesting. So Albert Schweitzer, he says, yes, you know, there is in nature crazy situations of just, you know, animals eating animals, insects eating insects. I just, my patio is filled with spiders right now, and they're eating tons of insects, and it's really disgusting. So we do have this, that life is filled with destruction. We definitely notice that. But he's basically saying, first of all, one thing, don't consider nature as necessarily your moral compass. Just because it's in nature, a spider also sometimes, I guess, I don't really, not an expert on spiders, but I've heard that sometimes they will eat their mates. So, I mean, that's not a more like, oh, because it's in nature, good, we can all do that. That's not acceptable. So don't use it as your moral compass. But Schweitzer is really arguing that we should only end life in nature when it's absolutely necessary. In cases of self-defense, no problem. But in cases where it's for just non-basic, trivial human interests, then that's the problem. So this little line right here is very important, non-basic, trivial interest. Self-defense, understandable, not self-defense, not necessary, totally free, just your own, satisfying your own wants and needs and not considering anything else, then that would be the problem. So Albert Schweitzer has kind of something to say on that one. Okay. Another thinker that I wanted to talk about was Aldo Leopold, and I'm just giving you guys the highlights here of the main players in the development of environmental ethics. And he has a philosophy called land ethics, and land ethic is looking at, and it sounds very complicated, it's very simple. Instead of just looking at individuals, instead of just looking at you know, in particular life forms, it's looking at the whole bio community, and he calls it the land/bio community, and it's a very holistic approach. That's what I want you to get out of it, is considering the whole, not the individuals. So that whole land ethic that we need to be placed in part of our moral consideration, the land itself. I don't literally mean like the dirt you're walking on, but the whole relationship with all the bio community that we are observing. And the future of the field. Okay, so this line here fits with this bullet. So the future of the field is that we should be trying to focus on solutions to problems as opposed to chastising, pointing fingers, or become what's called an environmental fascist, somebody who's always, you know, judging others and making others feel bad. Instead of putting all that energy in that direction, let's be the solution. Let's work on solutions. Let's be the problem solvers. And the another bullet talks about, and this is, a lot of this is coming from the reading, that we can really change things, not from the government telling us what to do, but from the bottom up solutions, from the grassroots, from us changing our own behavior and our own way of thinking. So it's not, shouldn't come from the top down, but from the bottom up. And part of that bottom up, changing our own thinking, a lot of it has to do with exposure to scientific understanding of the environment, and really understanding what's at play here and not being ignorant. So really being well versed in the field and the subject and knowing it. Business ethics can play a big role here. We know that the power of the consumer is very significant. So if people aren't buying products that are, you know, hurtful to our environment, then those products aren't going to be made. So we are very empowered as consumers, and that can play a big role as something we can do to help our environment. And then just develop an overall environmental consciousness, see our connection with nature and our obligation to protect it, and just kind of work and nurture that environmental consciousness, and not just, you know, shelve it and say, I'll think about it later, but make it part and parcel of how you see the world. Now, problems we face, the article that I assigned, one of them walks you through like ozone depletion, the greenhouse effect. We've heard these words before, but it really walks you through what causes them. We have what's called acid rain. So all of this is going to be discussed in one of the websites I give you, and the solutions we can do, and some of it's pretty basic, but changing our transportation, recycling, renewable sources of energy, changing our habits, etc. So that kind of walks you through some examples of that you can do to make a difference and lessen your footprint on the planet. This link here is to what's called a footprint calculator, and it allows you to put in kind of your lifestyle and how you live your life, and it tells you, you know, what impact you're having on the planet. A lot of students are kind of shocked that, oh my gosh, I'm not doing too well with that calculator. But a lot of it could be contributed to how you get around on the planet, your transportation, and also a lot of it can be attributed to what you're eating, because that dramatically impacts the environment as well. So your food choices is to be considered. So we have reading, films, and posts. I don't necessarily need to click on everything, but a basic article introduces environmental ethics, a lot of it what I just discussed with you. This is the website that walks you through some of the problems and solutions. And then we have an article by Peter Singer, focusing not so much on the environment, but on poverty and famine and what we can do to make a difference. So that was a cool one. And then some films. So these two here are fun, what I call my fun films that aren't going to be tested on, but this is a cartoon, this is a song, and they're fantastic. These are pie posts from students of the past that I loved so much I put in here. We have Hank Green, a lot of people love Hank Green, and these two, I'm going to jump for a second down here. These are two documentaries, and they're like 2-hour documentaries, and I'm not having you watch them, but just the trailers. And it's The 11th Hour and Before the Flood, and they're both narrated by Leonardo DiCaprio, who is himself an environmentalist. And if you wanted to watch the whole thing, you can find it on YouTube, I'm sure. Oh, I was going to say Yahoo, but YouTube. And Mount SAC has oftentimes Earth Day celebration in April. And they sometimes dedicate a whole week, and they show various films on campus, and The 11th Hour and Before the Flood are shown. Another film I noticed that Mount SAC has shown is The Story of Stuff. And The Story of Stuff is an excellent 20-minute film. I made it optional because I had enough for you and I didn't want to book you with too many films, but The Story of Stuff can be considered an extra credit because it's supplemental. Watch it and write a post on it if you have time. So there you go, and then you have a post question on that. So hopefully this kind of set the stage for you to understand the material. If you, again, are an environmental student in here and you're very well versed in all of this, this is just not even scratched the surface for you, but it might have exposed you to the origins of Earth Day and the origins of the environmental movement and the classic philosophical positions. The last human scenario experiment is kind of a fun one to think about, and the whole land ethic. I mean, I love Albert Schweitzer, so a lot of it might be new to you, perhaps. I'm not sure. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Let me stop share, and let me thank you very much. Yay, have a good night. Have a good day, or whatever it is. Bye-bye.